Okay, so you want to own a franchise. You don't have to build a brand from scratch. You don't have to figure out the menu, the marketing, the operating procedures, the supply chain. Somebody already did all of that, tested it across hundreds or thousands of locations, and packaged it into a manual you can follow. You write a check, you sign an agreement, and you're running a proven business model on day one, with a recognized logo already pulling customers through the door before you've served a single one yourself. That's the pitch. That's why franchising gets marketed as the safest on-ramp into small business ownership for someone who's never run a business before. Here's the problem. Proven business model is doing an enormous amount of work in that pitch, and it obscures the fact that a franchise isn't really a business you own. It's a long-term contractual relationship with a franchisor who controls almost every meaningful decision you'd normally make as a business owner, while you carry almost all of the financial risk. And once you understand that a franchise is fundamentally a licensing and control arrangement wearing the appearance of independent business ownership, everything about how franchises actually make money for their owners, and why the failure and disappointment rate in this industry is so much higher than the marketing suggests, starts to make sense. Let's start with what it actually costs to buy in, because the sticker price you see advertised is genuinely just the beginning, and understanding the full capital stack is the first place franchise buyers routinely get surprised. Every franchise charges an upfront franchise fee, typically ranging anywhere from $20,000 to $50,000 for many established food and service brands, up to $75,000 or more for premium, high-demand concepts, simply for the right to use the brand name and operating system. That fee alone is not the investment. On top of it, you're responsible for the full build-out cost of your specific location, leasehold improvements, kitchen equipment for a food concept, signage, point-of-sale systems, initial inventory, and a working capital reserve to survive the months before the location becomes profitable. Depending on the concept, total initial investment for a single franchise location commonly runs anywhere from $150,000 for a lean, low-square-footage concept, up to $1.5 million or more for a full-service restaurant or a larger retail format, and this is precisely why virtually every franchisor is legally required, under United States franchise regulation, to disclose these figures in a document called the Franchise Disclosure Document, or FDD, which every serious prospective buyer needs to read in full, and ideally with an attorney, before signing anything. Here's the number inside that document that deserves the most scrutiny, and it's the one number a lot of excited first-time buyers skim past. Item 19, the Financial Performance Representation. This is the section where a franchisor may, though isn't legally required to, disclose actual revenue and profit figures from existing locations. Here's the trap. Many franchisors choose not to include Item 19 disclosures at all, which is entirely legal, but it means a prospective buyer is being asked to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars in a business with zero verified information about what similar existing locations actually earn. Even when Item 19 is included, the figures presented are frequently structured in ways that can flatter the opportunity, showing average revenue across all locations rather than net profit, or highlighting only the top-performing quartile of stores rather than the full range of outcomes across the entire system, including locations that are struggling or have already closed. A genuinely careful buyer doesn't just read Item 19. They independently contact existing franchisees directly, using the contact list every FDD is required to include, and ask pointed questions about real profitability, not the story the sales representative told them during the pitch process. Now, ongoing fees, because this is where the franchisor's revenue model and the franchisee's profit margin come into direct, permanent tension, every single month for the life of the agreement. A royalty fee, typically calculated as a percentage of gross revenue, not net profit, commonly runs somewhere between 4 and 8%, and it's important to sit with that distinction for a moment, because it's the single most structurally important fact in the entire franchise relationship. The franchisor gets paid a percentage of every dollar that comes in the door, regardless of whether the location is actually profitable that month. A franchisee who's losing money because costs ran high or a slow season hit still owes the exact same royalty percentage on whatever revenue did come in. The franchisor's revenue is tied to your top line. Your actual paycheck is tied to your bottom line. Those are not the same number, and in a bad month, the gap between them is where a franchisee's actual take-home income disappears. On top of the royalty, most franchise agreements also require a marketing or advertising fund contribution, commonly another 1 to 4% of gross revenue, pulled across the entire franchise system to fund national or regional advertising campaigns. This fund is frequently a source of genuine friction within franchise systems, because individual franchisees, particularly those in markets where the national advertising campaign doesn't clearly translate into local foot traffic, sometimes feel they're subsidizing brand awareness in other regions without seeing a proportional local benefit, and disputes over exactly how marketing fund dollars get allocated and reported have been the subject of real, documented conflict and even litigation between franchisees and franchisors across multiple well-known brands over the years. So let's actually do the math on what these combined fees mean for a real location, because the abstract percentages understate how much they compress an owner's actual margin. Picture a franchise location generating $800,000 a year in gross revenue, a genuinely solid, healthy-sounding number for a lot of retail and food service concepts. A 6% royalty is $48,000 a year, gone before you've paid a single employee or a single utility bill. A 2% marketing fund contribution is another $16,000. That's $64,000 a year, over 8% of total revenue, flowing out to the franchisor before rent, before labor, before food or product cost, before insurance, before literally anything else the owner has to pay to keep the doors open. This is exactly why franchise concepts with genuinely thin operating margins to begin with, many food service concepts in particular, can leave an owner with a dramatically smaller actual take-home profit than the gross revenue figure would suggest to someone doing quick mental math from the outside. Now let's talk about the control side of this relationship, because this is where proven business model reveals its real cost, and it's a cost that isn't measured in dollars, it's measured in autonomy. A franchise agreement typically dictates, in enormous and legally binding detail, exactly how the business must operate. Approved suppliers you're required to purchase from, sometimes at prices meaningfully higher than you could source the same or comparable products for independently, because the franchisor frequently earns a rebate or commission from those approved suppliers, an additional, less visible revenue stream for the franchisor that exists entirely separate from the royalty and marketing fees. Mandatory renovation and remodeling cycles, sometimes required every 7 to 10 years regardless of whether the owner believes the investment is financially justified for their specific location, that can run into six figures and are frequently a condition of the franchise agreement's renewal. Required operating hours, required uniform standards, required menu items or product lines, even when a specific item is genuinely unprofitable at a particular owner's specific location due to local costs or demand. Marketing and pricing decisions that are frequently set or heavily constrained at the corporate level, meaning a franchisee typically cannot simply lower prices to respond to a new local competitor, or raise them to offset a genuine local cost increase, without navigating franchisor approval processes that can be slow, restrictive, or in some cases simply unavailable. This lack of control becomes particularly consequential during broader economic disruption. When a franchisor makes a strategic decision at the corporate level, a national pricing promotion, a significant menu or product line change, a shift in supply chain vendors, individual franchisees are frequently required to implement that decision at their own location regardless of whether it makes sense for their specific market, and the cost of implementing corporate mandated changes, new equipment, new signage, new packaging, typically falls on the individual franchisee, not on the franchisor who made the decision. Now, here's a topic that deserves genuinely careful, even-handed treatment, because it's one of the most consequential and most litigated issues in franchise law, the question of exactly how much control a franchisor exercises over franchisees' employees, and why it matters so much financially. Under United States labor law, the degree of control a franchisor exercises over franchisee operations and staffing decisions can, under certain legal standards, affect whether the franchisor might be considered a joint employer alongside the franchisee for certain legal purposes, an issue that has been the subject of shifting regulatory guidance and significant legal dispute over the past decade, with real financial stakes for both franchisors and franchisees depending on how that question gets resolved in any given jurisdiction or time period. This is a genuinely complex and evolving area of law, and the practical reality is that franchise agreements are frequently drafted specifically to preserve the franchisee's status as an independent employer, precisely because of the legal and financial consequences that can follow if that status is successfully challenged. It's worth knowing this issue exists, and worth genuinely understanding the current legal landscape in your specific jurisdiction before signing, rather than assuming the franchisor's standard contract language definitively settles the question. Territory protection is another area where the fine print matters enormously, and it's a genuine point of leverage imbalance between franchisor and franchisee. Many franchise agreements grant a franchisee some form of protected territory, but the actual scope of that protection varies dramatically by brand and by specific agreement. Some grant a genuinely exclusive radius where the franchisor cannot open or license another location, while others grant only limited protection, or protection that can be modified as the franchisor's broader system growth strategy evolves. A franchisee who invests hundreds of thousands of dollars building a loyal local customer base, only to have the franchisor approve a new location from the same brand a few miles away years later, splitting the existing customer base between two locations both paying royalties on a now smaller slice of demand, has experienced one of the more common and more painful disputes in franchise ownership. And it's precisely why reading the territory protection clause of a specific FDD with real scrutiny, rather than assuming franchise implies some standard, universal level of protection, is essential before signing. Let's talk about financing, because how a franchise purchase gets funded shapes the entire risk profile of the investment from day one. Many franchise buyers finance a significant portion of their initial investment through small business administration-backed loans, which frequently offer more favorable terms than a conventional commercial loan precisely because the franchisor's proven track record and standardized operating model is viewed by lenders as reducing some of the inherent risk of a brand new independent business. This is genuinely one of franchising's real financial advantages over starting a fully independent business from scratch, easier access to financing, but it comes with a corresponding downside, that same debt load, commonly requiring the owner's personal guarantee, meaning personal assets, not just the business itself, are on the line if the location fails, sits on top of the royalty and marketing fee obligations we already discussed, creating a fixed monthly financial burden, debt service plus ongoing franchise fees, that has to be covered regardless of how the location is actually performing in any given month. Now let's talk honestly about the actual success and failure economics of this industry, because the marketing materials and the government-mandated disclosures tell genuinely different stories, and a careful buyer needs both. Franchise industry advocates frequently point to research suggesting franchised businesses have somewhat different survival rate patterns than fully independent startups over comparable time horizons, and there's real, legitimate substance to the argument that a proven operating system, established supply chains, and brand recognition provide genuine structural advantages, particularly for a first-time business owner who's never managed inventory, staffing, or marketing before. But it's equally true, and equally well documented, that franchise ownership outcomes vary enormously by specific brand, specific location, and specific market conditions, and that plenty of individual franchise concepts, including some well-known national brands at various points in their history, have experienced significant location closure waves when the underlying business model, the royalty burden, the required supplier costs, the corporate-level strategic decisions, simply didn't pencil out for a meaningful share of their franchisee base at the unit economics level, regardless of how strong the brand name looked from the outside. The honest takeaway here is that a franchise is not, on its own, a reliable predictor of financial success. The specific brand's actual unit economics, disclosed honestly in a thoroughly reviewed FDD and verified through direct conversations with existing franchisees, matters enormously more than the general category of franchise versus independent business. Let's talk about exit and resale, because this is a dimension of franchise ownership that first-time buyers frequently don't think through until years later, when it suddenly becomes urgent. Selling a franchise location isn't like selling an independent business you built entirely on your own terms. Franchise agreements typically grant the franchisor a right of first refusal on any sale, meaning the franchisor can match any offer you receive from an outside buyer and take the sale themselves, and the franchisor typically must approve whoever you eventually do sell to, ensuring the new owner meets the franchisor's standards and is willing to sign a new, current version franchise agreement, which may carry meaningfully different, sometimes less favorable, terms than the original agreement you signed years earlier. This approval requirement can meaningfully slow down a sale process and can, in some documented cases, give the franchisor genuine leverage to influence the sale price or terms, since a franchisee typically cannot simply sell to whoever offers the most money without that buyer clearing the franchisor's approval process first. Let's talk about renewal too, because a franchise agreement isn't a permanent grant of the right to operate under that brand, it's a fixed-term contract, commonly running 10 to 20 years, and renewal, at the end of that term, is frequently not automatic or guaranteed on the original terms. A franchisor can, depending on the specific agreement language, decline to renew, or offer renewal only under a substantially updated agreement with different fee structures, different territory terms, or different operational requirements than the franchisee originally signed up for decades earlier, meaning an owner who spent 20 years building a location's local reputation and customer base can, in less favorable renewal scenarios, find the terms of continuing to operate that same location meaningfully worse than what originally attracted them to the brand. So let's put together what a real franchise location's financial picture actually looks like over a full year, because this is where the optimistic and realistic versions of this business genuinely diverge, and the gap between them is driven by exactly the structural factors we've walked through. In the optimistic scenario, you've thoroughly vetted the FDD, spoken candidly with a meaningful number of existing franchisees rather than relying on corporate-provided references alone, chosen a brand with genuinely strong, transparent unit economics and a fair, well-defined territory protection clause, and secured a location in a market with strong underlying demand for the concept. Under those conditions, a well-run franchise location generating $700,000 to $1.2 million in annual revenue can, after royalties, marketing fund contributions, labor, occupancy costs, and required supplier costs, deliver a net profit margin somewhere in the range of 10 to 20%, translating to owner earnings of $70,000 to $240,000 or more a year, alongside the genuine operational advantages of an established brand, a proven training system, and, in many cases, real ongoing support from the franchisor's field consultants that a fully independent business owner would have to build entirely from scratch. In the realistic scenario, a few unglamorous things go wrong that aren't exotic risks at all. They're the normal risks of this exact business structure. A required corporate mandated remodel arrives sooner than the owner budgeted for, running well into six figures at a moment when the location's cash reserves weren't built to absorb it. A new location of the same brand gets approved a few miles away, splitting the existing customer base and revenue between two royalty-paying locations rather than one. A required supplier price increase, passed down from the franchisor's national vendor agreement, compresses margins on the core menu or product line without the local owner having the pricing flexibility to fully offset it. Under those conditions, that same $700,000 to $1.2 million revenue location can slide from a comfortable double-digit margin into a thin single-digit margin, or into a genuine loss in a slow quarter, while the royalty and marketing fund obligations, calculated on gross revenue rather than profit, keep arriving exactly the same regardless of how thin the actual margin has become. None of this shows up as one dramatic failure. It's a slightly higher supplier cost, a slightly earlier remodel requirement, a slightly more crowded local territory, compounding quietly month after month until an owner who did everything the operating manual told them to do is still watching their actual take-home profit shrink for reasons entirely outside their direct control. So does owning a franchise actually work as a business? The honest answer is that it works genuinely well for owners who go in with realistic eyes open to exactly what they're buying, not independence, but a long-term, tightly controlled partnership where the franchisor's revenue is guaranteed on gross sales regardless of your profit, and where your actual financial outcome depends enormously on the specific brand's real unit economics, the fairness of your specific territory and agreement terms, and how honestly you investigated all of it before signing, rather than on the general reassurance that comes from a recognizable logo. The proven system really can meaningfully reduce the operational learning curve compared to building an independent business entirely from scratch. But that reduced operational risk is being traded, permanently, for reduced control, and the franchisees who do well long-term are almost always the ones who understood that trade completely, read the FDD in full, called the existing franchisees themselves, and negotiated or walked away from unfavorable terms, rather than the ones who fell in love with the brand and signed the standard agreement the sales representative handed them.